All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And thanks again for another broadcast of the Conversations on Retail Asset Protection Risk Mitigation series. As many of the followers know, my pedigree is a combination of retail and military. So I'm sprinkling in some military transitioning and some practitioner experience on those that have gone through the transition at various levels. So we last year, this month, we had General David Petraeus on. Certainly a very different level of transition for him from active duty to director of CIA and now at KKR. And then we've had other levels. And my friend Jim Barren, who will engage here in a minute, Jim and I served together back in the early 90s in Germany in an MLRS unit. And for those civilians that may not know what that means, multiple launch rocket system, it's what you see on the news that's kicking Russia's ass, that launches rockets and ATACMS missiles. And Jim and I were serving together in a unit back then in Germany because it proved its early worth in whatever they called the war back then, Desert Storm 2, I guess. No, Desert Storm 1. So we've been connected for a lot of years. So Jim got out of the service about 7 or 8 years ago, and I'll give him a minute to talk through that. And what we want to highlight for the listeners and everybody, some guests may be scratching their head, what in the hell's this got to do with retail? Jim, a ton, as you probably already know, a ton of private sector organizations actively and openly recruit veterans because they understand the inherent value in active duty, honorable underscore active duty service, be that from non-commissioned officers, enlisted, or commissioned officers. And the package you get with that, and I'll talk about as you and I talk, what I have learned over the years and 22 years short of a month at Walmart and understanding how does that translate? Who gives a crap? Nobody needs, a tank gunner or an artilleryman or a sniper or, a special forces guy that kicks in doors and smokes bad guys. They don't need that in the civilian world. So we'll talk and highlight. I'll ask Jim to highlight some of those skills as an Army officer and a West Pointer. What? What does that mean? So, Jim, if you would take a few seconds and walk us through your academy grad. You were year group 80, I'm going to guess, 89?
So I graduated in 1989. Yes. And I finished my career up there, which probably there's a lot of professors that I had back in the late 80s that would be rolling over, were really scratching their heads to how did Barron end up back there? But I did my last duty assignment before I retired. But one thing I don't think you pointed out was I was a lieutenant. You were my battery commander back in the early 90s. And that was the only time. So I'm a career field artillery officer. It was the only time that I served in an MLRS artillery unit. From then on, and prior to that, I was in 155 cannon units. Fielded the Paladin, which you can go in. I think the 2024 version of the Paladin is also offering some destruction in Eastern Europe right now as well. But I say that because later on I may have an analogy between an MLRS soldier and a 13 Bravo cannon cocker soldier that may relate to the current environment where we are now and some of the challenges I've felt through transition from being a career military officer to working in the civilian world, where I work for a privately owned mechanical construction company. Like you said, 28 and a half years service. I field artillery officer, retired colonel, probably I think '06 full colonel was the longest rank. So I was, for my last 7.5 years, 8 years, my last 8 years. Essentially, I was a full colonel. So I was a full colonel
Good
longer
Lord.
than I was any other rank, which also had, to me, in lessons learned, probably had some detriment in the long run. As I transitioned, if we talk through some of the transitioning from military to the civilian world, but
Wow, that's a long time. Because as you know, or many of the listeners may know, but for the civilians, you're typically a second lieutenant for a couple of years. Couple of years as a first Louis, about fourth year on active duty, you're a captain. You ride that horse till what, about 8 or 10 years service, something like that, and then you're up for major, and then on up the ladder. Um, and I'll open the call, Jim, and I'm very transparent about my military career. I spent a ton of time on the University of Alabama campus where I graduated. I've been going down there every semester for the last 7 years, speaking to students on the realities of a professional career, not what their parents may have told them, not the sanitized version that it's euphoria and they're going to be senior VPs 28 minutes after they sign in. And it's been awesome. And one of the things I learned from that experience, and I'm also on the board down there, one of the things I've learned from that experience is I tell the same story over and over and over. And a mentee of mine that goes with me down there, because he's younger and theoretically can connect with the student body a little bit better in a different way, is he told me one time during COVID, he's like, dude, you tell the same story every time. Why in the hell don't you write a book? Because every time we have these conversations with anywhere from 2 to, I think this semester I've got almost 800 students I'm speaking to, you always get the same questions, and they're deep. They're not self-serving. They're not, how do I get to be a VP in 1 year? How am I going to make six figures? It's, how do you deal with a toxic work environment? What are your missteps? Is what really got me to be. And Jim, you know me, I'm not a guy that wears his feelings on his shoulder, but I found that was significant to the kids to know, all right, here's an old guy. He's been really successful. That's okay with saying, you know what, I wasn't as good as I needed to be in my early days on active duty. So the veiled gift, and you remember, of course, Colonel Gay, was our battalion commander in Germany. We're still friends to this day. And I had the privilege of commanding 2 units, which back in the day was rather unusual. I commanded a service battery of a cannon battalion, and that transitioned into an MLRS battery. But top block coming out of that, and that means something to the veterans, but I won't get into the detail, but very good ratings and evaluations. And I get to the '04 board. I was a senior officer instructor at Fort Sill and didn't make the list. And I remember it was then Colonel Drinkwater, the gunnery department, full bull. I was on TDY at Fort Knox. And the colonel called and said, Captain Elverston, I am speechless. I don't understand what I'm looking at. What can you tell me? And after you get off the initial gut punch, I'm like, shit. Oh, okay. That to me was my gift, Jim, as odd as it sounds, because you know me, you served with me. I never would have gotten out. I mean, they were going to have to run me off. I loved it. Being able to serve with soldiers, the intensity, the camaraderie, all those things that veterans know. But it turned out to be the best thing professionally that ever happened to me, because it was the nudge I needed. So I had a freshly minted MBA, decided to get out. I could have gone for the second look, but I'm like, you know what? There's meaning behind this. I need to go. So I did, landed at Walmart, transitioned very well. Anyway, this is more about Jim and him sharing his experience, but that's kind of how I landed in a transition. And the transitioning programs, Jim, as you and I talked about at the beginning of the call, were crap. I mean, is what it is. They were not prepared for, my year group was 84. And that was Ronald Reagan, during the buildup, and we had huge numbers of cohorts of officers. So when that big class of 84 got to the much smaller needs of the Army around 1992, when I got to SIL, they're like, hey, we got to get rid of like 50% of these guys. So it became not a reason to promote, but a reason to not promote. And I cover all that in my book. I'm not going to waste time on this broadcast. But Jim, talk us through, other than 8 years on active duty as a full bull, what was your little guy on your shoulder saying it's time? Talk us through that.
Well, really, because due to some choices throughout my career, I mean, I commanded a battalion. Essentially, it was a great experience in the mid 2000s. It was a challenge at that time. So that's when I was a lieutenant colonel. It was a great experience. The Army was going through a difficult time. It was the height of the surge in Iraq. It was very difficult for the Army to recruit and just bring new soldiers into the pipeline. So I did that for 2.5 years. And I say that because that was probably the most challenging experience I had, because it was an organization that we essentially stood up from it. Well, for those of you that are former military, the brigade that the battalion was a part of was moving from one installation to another in the course of redeployments from deployment. So essentially, it started out with my sergeant major, myself, and probably about a smattering of 20 enlisted soldiers and a few junior officers. And then it was up to the human resources pipeline, the Army Human Resources pipeline, to fill us with, both a lot of soldiers right out of basic training,
Wow.
as well as soldiers that are permanent change of station coming in from other locations where they had probably deployed at some point.
Yeah.
18 months after taking the guide on there, we deployed to Iraq for another 12 and a half months, which I'm not going to go into, but that was so building an organization from the ground up, and then training it and deploying it was a tremendous experience to kind of go through my military career. Probably due to not keeping my mouth shut at certain times over the course, and this is getting to the answer to your question, kind of made me an 06 for the remainder of my career. So I was going to hit the 30-year mark, where that's mandatory retirement if you were an 06. And I did not want to move again. I pretty much I was going to come up on the 29-year mark, and it would have been time for me to do a permanent change of station. So it was a pretty simple decision for me that, hey, I've done my time. The transition is now. Like I said, I was at a great place. I was working for a great human being, a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant General, he's retired now, Bob Caslin, who's the superintendent at West Point at the time. I've been his G3, or director of operations there, and then evolved into being his chief of staff for probably my last, 9 months or so, before wearing a uniform for the last time. And didn't really know what I wanted, had no idea what I wanted to do, and none. And I went to the transition course, or the 1 week of, and I can't even remember what the name of it was. And I would give it to them. The folks that ran it made an attempt. I was able to get. Well, the only reason we're back in touch, because I'm terrible at staying in touch with people, is because they made me get a LinkedIn account. So I had to get a LinkedIn account while I was going through this transition. I think it was a week. It was a week program, and was able to write a resume or try to translate a resume from my military background. As I was, it was very fulfilling for me to be able to finish my military career where I started, because it refreshed me with a new sense of energy. Because the one thing as I got more and more senior through my years of service and experience, the thing that kept me going were I love motivated young people that are full of energy, that want to do the most right thing, that are bright, have the desire to succeed, and really are what I would have been 30 years before, at least how I would picture myself 30 years before, along with a high and tight haircut instead of a skinhead haircut. And so it was a tremendous opportunity for me to do that for my last 3 years. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was able to fall into, and I've been very lucky is how things have worked out. I ended up being able to stay there for the first year after I retired. I didn't stay in the, I had the great things of being a colonel at the United States Military Academy. I lived in a house that, I think Denzel Washington lived on the other side of the river from where I lived. I could see, so my house had a perfect view, was right above, overlooking the Hudson River.
Oh man,
great experience. I couldn't keep that because I was retired, but
sure.
Stayed for about another 10 months there, and worked in the athletic department with young people. So they have a Division I athletic department, Army West Point Athletics, and I was fortunate enough to kind of transition from being a colonel, still working with military people, but I was wearing a shirt and tie. I mean, I'm kind of this. I kind of like not wearing a shirt and tie and dressing like this, but and working in athletics. One thing I did discover there, there's a lot of people that think that they can work in college athletics, that don't work in college athletics. Okay. It requires a certain set of skills and experience, that, it's not something that you really can walk directly from one thing or from one phase of life or career path into that and immediately be as successful maybe, or command the same type of influence as you did in the previous career path. And so that was one thing was, so that helped me or helped shape me that, I liked what I was doing. But that's not what, unless I'm just not going to do anything. I was 51 years old. I'm not going to do anything for the rest of my life. It's probably not what I'm going to do for at least the rest of my life, until I decide to go live in a shack on the beach somewhere. Live off of the government, like a lot of people I see on my way home from work every day now. So it wasn't that. I guess I didn't have the challenges. I wasn't. It was comfortable. I wasn't like I had to go look for a job right away. I had this opportunity that was presented to me as I retired, and I thought maybe that's what I'm going to do. But I kind of figured out while I was doing it, this isn't necessarily for me. If I want to be maybe at a different level, based off of how I had, how I evolved, throughout my previous career. And I got that opportunity because of, so I guess my message would be, networking. I am terrible, as I've told you before, I'm terrible about staying in touch with people that I've served with, just because it's, you run into the mindset of, I'll run into him again sometime. There's a guy named Tony Helton. So I don't know if you remember, Tony Helton was in the battalion. He was the BMO. Once upon a time, and
okay, I do remember the name.
I ran into him in Iraq. He kind of the same thing happened when I was a battalion commander in Iraq. I ran into him, and he was, I think, he was, he had been when I left. I was a lieutenant. He was a captain. Well, he was still a captain when I went to Iraq. He was a captain. I was a lieutenant colonel or something like that, because he got called
Holy
back.
crap.
He kind of fell into the same thing, that he got called back to active duty. I
Yep.
can't remember too much more than that, but it's just the way the career path went. You'd always run back into somebody. I'm terrible. I have friends that people I still call my friend that I haven't been in touch with in many years, that I went to West
Yeah.
Point with, saw throughout our years of service, and just I don't have the whatever it is, and it's probably wrong, but don't have the wherewithal to pick up the phone and contact them.
It's
Saying,
it's
go
it's
ahead.
hard. It's hard. I mean, I reached out to you. I finally found our old first sergeant who I had an immense amount of respect for, First Sergeant McMullen. Colonel Gay still lives down in Smithfield, Virginia. My in-laws live in McLean, and he is friends with my in-laws, so they're frequently up there. Um, and the being able to transition. So everything that I read, and I work with a firm up in your neck of the woods in Philadelphia, Zero Eyes. It's an artificial intelligence company, startup, well-funded startup, but a startup. And it was founded by former Navy SEALs. So they had, when they all got out, they were still young. They all went and got Ivy League MBAs, and they were all dissatisfied with the loss of sense of tribe and everything that most veterans go through. And long story short, they created Zero Eyes, and it's extremely successful. It's addressing, the ever-present active shooter threat that, affects everybody everywhere unless you're in your house. And they too, they talk through some of those struggles of being able to lose the sense of tribe. And one of the things that General Petraeus said, he wasn't talking about loss of sense of tribe, but one of the things that resonated with me, because I fell victim to it, is he said, Brand, if there's anything that I learned, this is Petraeus, if there's anything I learned when I transitioned out, is veterans had no friggin' idea how to monetize what they offer. You're just happy to get a damn job. You're looking for security. You're looking for the regular paycheck. You're looking for healthcare, whatever it is you're looking for. And, I kind of chuckled and I said, sir, that's exactly what happened to me. I took about a 25% pay cut to go to Walmart in 1995. But I didn't give a damn. I was happy to say I landed, and I didn't want to do anything in DOD. My director at the time, Ed Hughes, he said, you're crazy. You ought to transition over to a DA civilian. You ought to go to work for one of the, I'm like, dude, I don't do U-turns. I want something completely different. I want out. The most proud thing I've ever done in my life is wear the uniform. So it's not a, slam on military service. It's not that at all. I just want something new. And I just completed my MBA, and I'm like, holy shit, there's a whole civilian world out there that I got to your point on network. I was in a class full of CFOs, merchandisers, buyers, all kinds of people that I'm like, as strange as it sounds, I was like, I didn't know all this crap existed. So that, coupled with getting passed over, of course, that helps nudge you in one direction, was what tipped me to get out. But the inability to monetize. So how did you're a senior VP now. How did you transition? Did that ever become a thing when you transitioned out, or you just landed a job and said, thank God, I'm good?
I'll tell you what, I'm extremely blessed and fortunate. That's where I was going with the network thing. I mean, while I was, my last job on active duty, I established a relationship with, I was fair. I felt like I was fair. So I was the director of operations. So the kind of the bastard stepchild at the academy was always the athletic department, because you got brigadier general, you got the pillars of athletics, academics, discipline, military training. So you got a 1-star general in charge of the commandant that's in charge of military training and discipline. You got a 1-star general that's the dean. You got their boss, it's a 3-star general. Then you got this civilian that's the athletic director that's trying to compete, trying to compete on at the Division I level with these folks are going to go and graduate and serve 5 years at least, serve a commitment to their country.
Sure.
I always try to give them a fair shake. And, so going back to, one of the greatest compliments that I've ever received was, Jim Barren he's very selfless person. That's the greatest compliment I've received from a boss, about being selfless, that's not about me. And I approach things where, who can I help? When I'm in a position and doing my job, who's that small voice out there in the wilderness that might have the answer, but nobody's listening to them, or what have you. Now, that's not necessarily the case here, but I kind of gave them a fair shake. They had that department had challenges. Anyways, unbeknownst to me, maybe I made an impression or whatever, but the relationship I established there enabled me to get a job that I was able to transition to. So networking, for lack of a better term, I don't know if that's how it worked, but flash forward the networking, how I landed here, which I think I'm very, very fortunate. And I think I can provide some advice to people that are transitioning, but I kind of struck gold. I had a friend who was a fellow colonel, a couple years senior to me. He actually knocked the hell out of me on the football field when we were cadets, back when we were on the football team way back in the 80s.
He must be a big ass guy, because you're no skinny twit.
Well, he's about 6 inches taller than me. Very, very, very big guy. Anyways, we reunited when we were colonels, and he retired. He transitioned about a year before I did. And we still stayed in touch. So, via text message, what have you. And I get a call from him one day, and he says, "Hey, you're going to get a phone call from this person. It's a friend of mine. Hear them out, hear what they want to say. They told me they were looking for somebody. And I told them that you're the person. They asked me for a recommendation, and I gave them your name. So I owed it to this friend to take this phone call. That phone call led to a couple more phone calls, led to a couple of visits that led to a job offer. That the title hasn't changed. The role has changed over the course of the last 6 years where I've worked here. It'll be my 6-year anniversary. Will be coming up the Tuesday after Labor Day. But so happens that this friend of mine from the Army, his best friend that he grew up with back home in Wilmington, Delaware, and his best friend's brother were the owners of a mechanical contracting company that started in 1986 with the older brother and his box of tools in his truck in a shed. And that company had grown to about 350 employees in 7 different revenue generating business units, 7 different, and they were looking for somebody got to be a director of ops. I will tell you that my role has evolved through many different phases since I've been here. Titles are not important to me. I didn't know how, when I came into it, I didn't know how to negotiate. I basically came in and when I was asked, okay, what compensation are you looking for? I essentially took what my total compensation was and added 20% to it and said, this is what my ask is from when I was when I retired as an 06. And anyways, I ended up here, and um, my job and my responsibilities probably evolve, but uh, my transition has been long and hard. I still believe that I'm transitioning from one profession to the other profession every day. Um, I learn something new here every day. Um, I guess, so that's kind of my transition story. So I feel like I'm very fortunate and very lucky. I'm not planning on going anywhere unless they want to make a decision. The owners of this company want to make a decision.
Yeah.
That I'm not going anywhere. I'm committed, to what's going on. I've invested a lot. I've invested, well, 6 years. That's almost, it's almost 20, it's more than 20% of my previous career,
Yeah.
already here. What helped me and hurt me, or what did I learn as I transitioned? You don't know everything, going from one place to the next. And, uh, you got to be humble. I know every time I got myself in, I felt like I got myself in trouble, and I wouldn't be like trouble, like
Yeah.
principal's office, but where, I could have managed a situation better or something. It's when I wasn't humble. I think being humble, is, one of the key things, in transition, at least for me, and transitioning to, and this is not a publicly owned and traded company. So, I will tell you, you want to improve culture, we do construction, we do commercial construction, we do residential construction, we do custom home, construction. So there's a lot, and then we do service for all those things. And really it's HVAC and plumbing, and fire protection and those things. But we got folks that work with their hands, that are men and women in the field they're doing the work. I came in and the owner had all these orphans, what we would call staff officers or staff agencies, that were reporting to the owner, which, really, the owner didn't have time. The owner's being the CEO, president, he didn't have time for that. So, you talk about the orphan children, that the IT, the HR, the recruiting, the warehouse, the education and training. There's, and I'm leaving some out, but so, I started out by kind of gripping up some of those folks and trying to build these structures. The one thing I discovered, the big thing that you got to get across when you're transitioning from the military to the, civilian world, for me, and I hear what you got from General Petraeus, at that level, and but you got to understand that you got to generate revenue here every day. So I said this, I told the story about when I was a battalion commander, for a reason. I built a battalion. When I say my team, the team that I had, was able to assemble around me. We built out 5 batteries, HHB, service battery, 3 firing batteries, the headquarters, 600 odd soldiers. We built that out, trained it, took it to the National Training Center, for pre-deployment. Okay. All that stuff wasn't generating revenue though. Okay. We weren't, wasn't doing, so we were training, we were getting compensated. Our pay was taken care of. Our benefits were taken care of. All that overhead, all that was taken care of by Mother Army. We were generating revenue based off of the training we did when we went downrange and, conducted operations in Babel province, in Iraq. That's when that's when we started generating revenue. In the where I am now, you got to generate revenue every day. Production has to be king. All the other things that are going to go into making your organization better, more professional, improve processes, and those types of things, they got to take a second. They got to go second fiddle, where you got to work to build on those things while production takes the first seat. Because if you're not generating revenue, then you're not, you may not be here next week or next month.
That's similar experience at Walmart. I mean, it's all about sales. So, all the warm and fuzzy, all the, other crap in the periphery, it is meaningless if that top line sales number isn't moving north. And, in the specific case of Walmart, they're doing exceptionally well. They continue to do it quarter after quarter. But that's on the back of, 2.5 million hardworking, everyday rank and file people that, not everything's perfect. The company was dramatically different than when I joined in 95 and then when I did the cake and balloons in March of 2017. It was not even close to the same company, and good, bad, and indifferent. Let me jump over to, and I did not ask Petraeus this for obvious reasons. When I ask the question, you'll know why. In your sense, so 6-7 years in the saddle where you are and being a retired 06, multitude of challenges on active duty. What is your Reader's Digest version on the quality of leadership in uniform and suits? I have an opinion, but I won't share it until you share your thoughts on that.
Well, I will tell you that, I experienced some terrible leaders while I was in the military over the years. Some that, there's one I know of that was in the news several years ago that I reported to, my battalion reported to when I was deployed to Iraq. When I first met this person, so he was my superior. When I first met this person, you just get this feeling in your gut, and things that were coming out of their mouth. You just get this feeling in your gut. You're like, okay, anyways, that person, things came around on that person. There was a very highly publicized investigation on that person where they got court-martialed and so forth as a 1-star general. So they got found out. That's a great thing about the Army. Great thing to me about the Army is eventually you get found out, whether or not you are, they may miss you at a couple promotions or whatever, but eventually you get found, you get found out one way or the other, whether if it has to do with integrity issues or conduct issues, morals, ethics, those kind of things. You get found out, or just performance, or
that's what First Sergeant Mack always told me. He said, "Sir, when I would get heated up on something, he's like, 'Sir, slow down. You give a fool enough rope, he'll hang himself.' Yep, so if you don't get him this time, he'll come back. He's a dumbass. You'll get him the second time around." And I, like I always did at First Sergeant Mack, I'm like, all right, let me think about that a minute. So anyway, go ahead.
But getting back to leadership, so there's in the it's different, but it's not. There are people. So I kind of give you some of the qualities, and I get in my mind two people, and I don't know if I say their names. One of them's alive, and one of them I already mentioned. And I'll just call him the best man that I've ever worked with or served or whatever. And that was my boss that I mentioned earlier, Bob Caslin. Mm-hmm. He's just a genuine man, the person you just you want to emulate. And then there's a former chief of staff of the Army that was my division artillery commander when I was he's now passed away, but he was my DeVarty commander when I was a battery commander. When I was like you, when I worked for you, I was at Fort Hood, and that's a guy named Ray Odierno, who was probably he was the greatest, in my mind, the greatest leader that I had the opportunity to either work for, associate with, and there's been a whole bunch of others. But some of the things about the qualities of leader, and I'll kind of talk to you about in the current, I call it the civilian world. I still call it the civilian world, but it's really the real world. But they're genuine, they're authentic. there's no faith, and they're someone that you trust, but not just trust, but you just want to be around them. Even though they're senior, there's just something about them that, it draws you to wanting to be around them and not fail them. And so it's an intangible charisma, but, the give and take is that because they're genuine and authentic, that they care. Whether, I'll tell you one, General Odierno, for instance. So I had the opportunity when I was a young battery commander at Fort Hood. I took my battery along with an infantry battalion to the desert of Kuwait. Back in the mid-'90s, Saddam Hussein rattled his saber, and then we deployed, the United States Army would deploy some small little task force over to the desert of Kuwait. So just so happens, first cav was on summer of '96. First cav was on the hook, and it was called Intrinsic Action. And my battery went along with an infantry task force from 19 Infantry, I think, or 19 Cav, and 1st Cav Division, and my battery, which was Alpha Battery, 2nd Battalion, 82nd Field Artillery, Steel Dragons. So I was, for a time, I was the senior artilleryman in the desert out there. Got to do a lot of fun things. We had Paladin howitzers, different story. Big thing is General Odierno came to visit me. Now, I'm one of like 12 captains that he's the senior raider for. And he didn't just come to visit me. He came over there for war. It wasn't just to visit me, but to, it was war planning and things like that. And okay, he got one of his batteries out there in the desert. And first thing he said, and I can't remember who won the game or who didn't, but he talked about the Cleveland Indians baseball team, whatever, got beat in the playoffs. He basically busted my chops because I think he was a New York Yankees fan or something like that. But he was first thing he said to me was busting my chops. It wasn't about how's your training going or what are you doing about this? What are you doing about that? It was just, hey, Barren, you hear about the Indians got beat last night or something. They're going down tonight too. Something to that effect. And that's just, it just went a long way with, my story about him that he knew that I was an Indians fan. I don't even know if I knew that. I don't even think we ever had that. I was a junior captain, and this guy's in 06 that went on to do a lot of things. Resonated with me for the rest of my life, and unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago, way too soon. But that's an example like that is something from leaders. Leaders give good vision. They're able to give good. They give good vision and they listen. This is where I'm kind of transitioning into the civilian world or the new world. So my experience is there's not much different. The end states or the outcomes are there, but it's still kind of the same. The same factors, at least for me, that the leaders in the civilian world, people that you want to be around. Not because they're a bullshitter or because they got stories, all that. You kind of want to, people kind of evolve or, migrate to them, or they want to hear what they have to say. But they can communicate vision. They're authentic, genuine. They're not just, there's some passion and belief behind what is coming out of their mouth. I used to say, what fraud you perpetrating? So what's coming out of your mouth? Is that, that what you're perpetrating a fraud or no, but what direction, vision, guidance is coming out of their mouth? That's my, that's really my take on, leaders. They're, they got that thing that you want to be around. And, those characteristics and traits, you want to lead by example and things like that. Well, that's kind of the same thing. I watch, leaders in, where I work, they're going to, pick up, you don't walk past a piece of trash in the warehouse, you pick it up.
Yeah.
You don't, the door didn't shut right, or, you're in the restroom facility and something is wrong in the you make sure it gets fixed. You report it. You don't just ignore it. You don't walk by something. So there's all kind of different things, but really the characteristics are the same. The outcomes in terms of lead by example. All right, we're not talking about Joshua Chamberlain here and follow the
Yeah.
whatever it was the main infantry down the hill at Little Round Top.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the same qualities. You break it
They
down.
are. Yeah, they are. And my answer to that question is, and I've forgotten who the veteran is I was talking to that was a guest that month, but never in my career in the Army did I ever have, and like you, I had great bosses and I had guys that I'm like, how in the F did you get in a uniform? But it was never about integrity or character missteps. And I know you served many more years than I did. I had a total of 12 active duty years, 11 first time around than when I spent a year in Afghanistan. But there were good leaders, and there were those leaders, like you said, that you want to be around. They are stone crushers. They're leaders. They have a clear vision. There's no ambiguity in their communications. You get where they're going. And then there are others, like, and I won't mention his name, but the battalion commander that was placed right after Colonel Gay was a big letdown to me. Because Colonel Gay, while he probably didn't understand my intensity, he supported it. And he put me in that job, as he told me many years later. He said, I put you in that job for a reason. I didn't need a captain. I needed you. And, one of the things that, talking about being a real leader, when this was before you got there, my mom was the second trip home. So she died about 24 hours after I got in from Germany. And sometime in that month, and anybody that's lost a parent or a loved one knows your head's just not in the game. You're on autopilot. You're just trying to get things done. And he called. And this is before internet, guys. This was like 1990, 91. Colonel Gay called. And he said, look, we're not on a classified line, Brand, but I want to know if you would take on a second command. And for the non-veterans on the call, that was a big deal back in the day. You didn't get two. You were privileged to get one. You damn sure didn't get two. And it completely removed me from the fog I was in. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I wrote about it in my book. And I had the privilege, back to your comment on networks, I had the opportunity to tell him how significant that occasion was, that probably meant nothing more to him than other than to get an answer. And I said, sir, it just totally changed my frame of mind. You brought me out of one of the darkest moments in my life at that point in time. Desert Storm 1 was going on. I was in command. My unit was in Germany. We didn't know if we were going to get called. I mean, I had so many critically important competing priorities, and I needed that. So Colonel Gay was also the guy that would call me out. You know me, Jim. I had no problem with F-bombs, every other word. And he didn't. And he had a problem with that. And he talked to me one time and said, you have got to clean up your language, Captain Elverston. And I stupidly tried to justify it. And he looked at me, he looked at me, and as calm as a kitten, he just said, we're not having this conversation again. And he turned around and walked off. And I felt about that big, because I knew, for a man that I had immense respect for, everybody did. Colonel Gay was awesome, that I was dumb enough to even try and justify my mistake. So he gave me that opportunity. And, oftentimes, he'd come by and said, oh, hey, Brand, how is Private so-and-so's wife? And I'm thinking, okay, first of all, who the fuck is Private so-and-so? And I had no idea what was going on. So I'm sitting there, trying to tap dance and answer. That was Colonel Gay. He gave a damn about the soldiers, and he involved himself in, what did we have in strength, say, call it 600 soldiers, and a battalion. He knew that. And again, he's in my first book in several places, but what I learned most from him was that bravado and stone crushing is not synonymous independently with leadership. That's not.
I just, I throw out there that the one word, it's just kind of a soft word, but it's care. It's
Yep.
that they care. And it's not like they're going out. It's just that they care. So I well, I'll just someone that you hear from because they're doing what they think is the most right thing. It's just it's a natural thing. When I went through a personal tragedy several years ago, you know, didn't really publicize it or anything like that. And the word got out. I heard from people that I hadn't heard from in a long time. And I wasn't looking for that. And that's why I
Yeah.
didn't, why I wasn't shared broadly. But uh, some people reached out, and
Yeah.
that means a lot. Now, some of those people who reached out, I'm a freaking jackass because I haven't gone back and continued the relationship and networked and gotten in
Yeah.
touch with them. But they did the most right thing, and it's kind of we get into when you talk about leaders, it's because there's a difference between leaders and managers, and sometimes
Okay.
I'm part of a best practices group that I think has probably run its course for me, but that I've been part of for about 4 years, 3 years, 3.5 years, something like that. But there's a difference between being a manager and being a leader. Some are one or the other. You're very fortunate if you have those that are both. And what bothers me is when just because someone is in a position that says manager, people will refer to them as a leader.
Yeah.
You got to walk and talk the talk. But that's just a thing for me that I think sometimes maybe gets confused in the civilian world. Maybe I don't
100%.
I don't want to pass judgment on that. I will, you know, uh, um, go down the path of not every manager is going to be a leader, and we sometimes put people in positions that they're not necessarily qualified for, and we say, well, they can be a leader. I want to say every military organization I was in, if whoever the commander was. So, uh, in the thing I learned, I think in the military, I want to try to transition this over, or in when I'm talking about my current role and where I am, but, you have to be a follower. And in unless you became the chief of staff of the army, even the chief of staff of the army has to be a follower because,
Yep.
okay, he works for the commander in chief. So really, when you're in the military structure, well, unless you're the commander in chief, everybody else, you're a leader, but you're in a position of leadership. Whether or not you being in that position of leadership means you're a leader, which it doesn't qualify just because you're in a leadership position. But you have to learn how to be you got to learn how to be a good follower. You got to, ask questions, the right kind of questions, which one dig I want to get in here before is I kind of rambling on here with this thought, but going back to the 13 Bravos and 13 Mikes, field artillery cannon soldiers versus MRS soldiers. If one of those soldiers gave you some bottom up, asked a question for some bottom up refinement after you gave them some top down guidance, if you told a 13 Mike MRS soldier to dig a hole, they would ask you why. Whereas a 13 Bravo, if they had the testicular fortitude to ask you a question, would say, "How deep, sir?"
Yep.
So, and it just goes through. So
That's hilarious. It's
that's
absolutely true, but that's hilarious.
So that I throw I kind of throw that in there. You got to be a follower to be a leader. But going back, leader development was always in the top 3 priorities, and probably the number 1 priority in every military organization that I was in. In the civilian world, we kind of do things different, or priorities versus priorities are kind of revenue generated, or business related, and then you have values, or the values of our company, or integrity, family, courage. And,
It's probably what made us so successful. You remember most of the battery, Bravo battery,
13 Bravo.
MLRS, were 13 Bravos.
That's right.
And yes, I very much realized because I was a Canon guy, I didn't know shit about MLRS until they said, "Hey, you're going to be an MLRS commander." But yeah, there's a distinct difference. Two things I want to get to that I think's important, and you mentioned it. One is, in my mind, a future leader or manager either can be taught just about everything. So you can learn business acumen, P&L management, sales team structure, all that shit. You can't be taught to care. If you don't give a shit, number one, soldiers will realize that, i.e., your people in your subordinate organization on the civilian rung, they can see through that crap. And I learned that early on as a fire support team leader at Fort Knox. They can see right through that crap. So you can get up with a company line and a rah-rah, but if you don't give a damn, to me, you'll never be a leader. Secondarily, another point I want to make is that one of the missteps I made early on in active duty was I didn't get into roles. So this is one of the conversations I have with the students at University of Alabama, and particularly the ROTC students. It's critical to get into role and be a sponge the very second you sign in. I did not do that when I entered active duty. I went from college, Fort Sill, Oklahoma for OBC, it was called back then. And I kind of, okay, great. Didn't apply myself. Graduated, I think, 111 out of 113. So obviously not honor grad. And I didn't really apply myself on active duty as a lieutenant. I was afraid to ask questions because I thought as the officer I should have all the answers. So manual gunnery intimidated me. Being able to compute safety intimidated me, and I wasn't that good at it. But my transformation occurred when I got promoted to captain in March of 88. I was TDY at Fort Lee, getting ready to go to Germany. My number came up 1 March, so no ceremony, anything. I pinned on my rank in the hotel room before going to class. And I remember staring at myself in the mirror that, blocking my hat and looking at those railroad tracks. And I'm like, dude, you got to grow up. The party is over. You're going to walk out of this building onto the post, and lieutenants, your former peers, are going to be saluting you. And you need to be the guy that the battery commanders I used to work for that I respected. And that was my tipping point. And shame on me, it was about 3.5, 4 years too late. But my message is I did what I corrected when I came to Walmart. Dude, I tore that shit up day one. I took home all the training manuals I could get my hands on. I typed all my notes out that turned into a book for new store manager training. It got seen by some executive and like, we send that to the print plant. We're going to print that as a training manual, because I went through all the risk mitigation stuff, the reports, how losses happen, all that crap. And it paid huge dividends. I approached my second career like I should have my first. Last question. We're 1 minute after, but we got started a little late. But this to me is important, Jim. So everything that we talked about, what is your most important piece of advice for a veteran that's listening now, whether they've got a year left in boots or they're out struggling? What would you tell them if you had, one thing to tell them? This is the most important thing to help you be successful in your transition.
Well, probably and you're talking about anybody from an enlisted, ex-enlisted, because there's different challenges associated. But I would go back to be humble. And there's these 2 books, and I don't want to give plugs on it, but I mean, one of the things to help me grow in the civilian world is, man, there's so many doggone self-help books out there about this thing happening in business. So Patrick Lencioni wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He wrote The Ideal Team Player, which is a follow-on. I don't know if you've ever read those or anything.
No.
they kind of, there's, you can break them down to lists. You can take the 200-page book and you break them down to lists, and then you can expand out and go through them all. But, the ideal team player is hungry, humble, and smart. Well, anybody that's so, there's things that if you, and I want to be honest, because I've had bad luck in a few cases and bringing on former military to our organization. Sometimes it's led us to kind of look at things a little bit different, but usually it had to do with some type of character flaw and how that character flaw, either, for a number of reasons I don't want to get into, but the ideal team player, according to this author, I'm not trying to say anything, hungry, humble, and smart. Well, you can take care of two of those things just by being hungry and being humble, because you already got the simple things about punctuality, showing up in the right place, showing up in the right place at the right time, routinely, every day in the right,
Yep.
in the right
discipline.
Or part of our business unit, sometimes it has you scratching your head. So, we have people that go into customers' houses. It's not like the customers are coming into your house at Walmart.
Yep.
We have, service technicians that go into either companies or into private homes. You got a problem with your plumbing or HVAC. You got to represent the name on your uniform and shirt. You need to be presentable.
Yep.
And I'll just tell you things that, we get into things that tick me off. Well, we got about 240 company vehicles. They got my boss's last name all over. They're driving billboards. A couple times a month, a call will reach me, and I'm not saying that I'm high and mighty or anything like that, but a call will come into our call center and eventually get forwarded up to me about some good, I would say 9 times out of 10, they're trying to be good-natured civilian, trying to do the most right thing, which, God bless them, thank you. Telling me how bad one of our drivers, one of your drivers cut me off. One of your drivers was, using a handheld device is against most state laws now, in terms of holding the phone. One of your drivers was driving your rolling billboard, my words, holding his phone. It's pretty obvious. He was texting, holding his phone. So where do I go with this? Hungry and humble, or if you break those two kind of attributes down, and you just do the simple things, you're going to be successful. If you approach things by being hungry and humble, and then not everybody's smart, okay? But we're smart at different levels. You can practice at being smart. Part of being smart is being trainable. So it goes back to some of the intangible things, or the things that have made you a good follower and maybe a good leader in your service in the military. That, okay, you know how to be trained. You know how to learn. If you didn't, then you wouldn't have been successful on that rotation when you went to Afghanistan and you're in Coast Province on patrol, or in downtown Baghdad. I'm kind of showing my date, my age now or whatever, because, but so, going back, I kind of leverage on this book, but my boss and I talk about it all the time. We want people that are hungry, humble, and smart. How do we assess that we're getting people that are hungry, humble, and smart? So, it's pretty easy. You already got the other things that will separate you. If you're a militant, and it just depends upon where you are, where you want to go. The other thing for people to be successful, or that I think would, successful, you already have it, that you're mission focused. You take a task, you understand what top-down planning is about getting top-down direction. And if you're going to ask a question, you know what the right questions are. Those attributes are already built into you. Those are things that are not necessarily built into the normal people that we hire to go pick material in a warehouse or drive our company vehicles to a job site where they're working on a job. You understand what it means to be part of a team. Taking care of others, looking out for your buddy, all those little things that are, that we're taking for granted out here, that are just combat multipliers in the civilian world, in my humble opinion.
I needed, kind of like I told Petraeus when he mentioned monetizing himself as his takeaway, hungry and humble. I could have used that advice in January 1984 when I showed up at Fort Sill for OBC. I still had my college hat on. And I can say this now, and I laugh about it now, but there used to be study halls. So for a lot of us who didn't get something during the academic, so probably manual gunnery for me, which isn't hard. But we'd go to study hall, and there were so many of us in study hall, dude, believe it or not, a lot of us would slip out and go to the O Club, drink a bunch of beer, and we'd come back to study hall. And it was that kind of, rebellion's not the right word. I just never got into role. I never looked at myself in the mirror and said, damn it, you're an officer. And my message is, I made that mistake. I'm open about it. I tell the students about it, that get into role. If you're not going to do it, don't do the job. You're going to half-ass it. But I corrected that mistake at Walmart. And like I said, I went after it like nobody's business, and it paid huge dividends immediately. And I was late to getting into role on active duty, the railroad tracks on my hat. That's when the light bulb went off. Well, shit, I was 4 years in the saddle. I was a very different lieutenant. Remember when I used to tell you guys, maybe you don't, I'm like, you guys as lieutenants, I wouldn't have a fucking lieutenant that was like I was. You guys are way better than I ever was as a lieutenant. And I meant that. I was very fortunate with you, Eric Black, Chuck Bartos, Carl Trout, Jeff Ing. I'm probably missing one because we had 5 lieutenants. Much better quality. Well, Jim, for all the listeners out there, hopefully this is helpful. Jim, retired full colonel. All veterans know what that means. So there's a huge amount of depth and experience, combat experience in Iraq, leadership roles. You don't get any more intense than that. And I must say, that for an active duty veteran with combat leadership experience, there is no comparison in the civilian world. So internalize that if you're transitioning. Listen to what Jim's talking about being hungry and humble and smart, and don't make the mistakes that then Lieutenant Elverston made in Officer Basic, and try and correct it at how old was I? 35 when I went to Walmart. But hey, it all worked out great. Retired 10 years early. So no regrets, just some things I'd do differently. So Jim, thank you so much for your time, dude. I'm assuming you're okay. If listeners want to contact you for one-on-ones or some more time, they can find your stuff on LinkedIn. Is that accurate?
I'm on LinkedIn. Yep.
Okay. Greatly appreciated, dude. And we will push this out on LinkedIn. Like I said, probably the end of the week, certainly by Monday. So you'll see it and you'll be tagged and take it from there.
All right. Well, it's great seeing you. Best to Sue. Hello. I'll never forget, always remember her coming into the battery area back when we were young. And please pass on my best wishes to her and her family. And thanks for inviting me. This is I feel like I had a lot more to say that I didn't get to say, and I'm amazed how fast the time went.
An hour's never enough, dude. I always wish we could do 2 hours, but if we look at the span of the listening, because apparently Matt and those guys can look at about an hour is about all we're going to get. So anyway, nothing says we don't do a phase 2 later down the road. So greatly appreciate it, buddy, and have a good rest of your week.